Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and have we been living in a Marvel Cinematic Matrix in which the Scarlet Witch erased the X-Men? With the X-Men set to make their mutant homecoming to the MCU this year in Deadpool 3, it seems like Marvel's multiverse saga is just going to use, well, the multiverse to establish mutants in this franchise. So when we ask where have the X-Men been, the answer could just be they've been in a separate universe. But in order to say merging the Fox-era X-Men continuity cast into this MCU through some multiversal incursion event and just leave it at that would mean that the studio would plan to stick with Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, Kelsey Grammer, all those old guys for the long haul. And I love those guys, but I just don't see guys that age being Marvel Studios' X-Men lineup for the future, like what I assume will be their mutant saga on the other side of Secret Wars. So there has got to be some other explanation of how we get mutants and X-Men in the MCU, like beyond what they're already planning for the animated X-Men 97, but maybe following that roadmap. But also a plan that doesn't rewrite or negate the MCU Infinity Saga history that we've known and loved. Like, we still want to be able to watch Iron Man and be like, yeah, it's all still connected. So in this video, let's talk about the theory that the X-Men were supposed to have existed in the MCU continuity, but that at some point in the past, Wanda Maximoff warped and rewrote reality to erase them from existence. That in the MCU, we have been living a lie inside of a broken matrix where everyone has forgotten mutants existed. I know that we've discussed this theory on the New Rockstars channel before, probably in a number of WandaVision after shows that have blacked out, and I know for sure a number of theory videos over the years, and I know that I'm not the only person to ask this question or to theorize that the MCU we know is a post-House of M, No More Mutants reality, but my goal here is to just look at the new things we've learned about the MCU, like from the more recent Marvel titles, details and research from our latest 24 X-Men Snake rewatch, and just connecting the dots in a new way that I don't think we have before. So let's revisit the question. Did Wanda erase the X-Men? Okay, two ground rules here. One, let's try to do this without a multiversal reset explanation that involves incursions from other realities, just as part of an intellectual exercise, but also so that we can still live in an MCU where there was both a Robert Downey Jr. Tony Stark and X-Men at some point in history. Let's see if we can figure that out. And second rule, let's try to maintain what we like about the Infinity Saga and the X-Men, and not do something that'll piss everyone off, like force a new origin story for Magneto where he wasn't a Holocaust survivor. Trust me, you don't want to erase that. And I bring this up because that would rule out any explanation that like Thanos' snap radiation could have created mutants in the MCU, because that would mean that the MCU Magneto's origin story would have to be like in the present day, not in the 1940s. But since the MCU present day is like 2025 and beyond, I think we're just gonna have to accept that Magneto is gonna have to be old. And maybe it could just be that mutants, like the wizards of Harry Potter, live longer average lifespans, like say 120 years instead of 80 years, because, you know, they are more evolved humans. Okay, an important thing to know, and what I didn't know until recently, is that Kevin Feige from the beginning intended his MCU, at least at the beginning, to keep the door open to team ups with the X-Men and mutant characters. From 2000 to 2006, Kevin Feige had a hand in producing all pre-MCU Marvel titles. And at the time, he didn't really see much of a legal division among those properties. They were all part of a potentially shared universe. From 2006 to 2010, Kevin Feige's Marvel Studios was an independent studio. They partnered with anybody. They partnered with Paramount for Iron Man 1 and 2, for Captain America, for Thor, and then they partnered with Universal for the 2008 Incredible Hulk film. Kevin Feige was open to working again with Fox for an X-Men team up with his Marvel characters, or with Sony for a Spider-Man team up. And for Spider-Man, he absolutely did that with Amy Pascal in 2014 for a Spider-Man MCU reboot. It was just that in those early years, Feige was more focused on characters Marvel owned outright and wouldn't have to share, which included Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and the Avengers. But to legitimize these characters in the eyes of viewers, Feige wanted to present them as characters who could exist alongside bigger names like the X-Men. That is why Phase 1 of the MCU and most years after that didn't really set any of their stories in the years 2000 to 2008. It's kind of like a big gap in the MCU historical record where Kevin Feige didn't really plant any flags. And I think initially he did that to keep the option open of saying that those Fox X-Men films that were set in the mid and early aughts as part of a shared history with what he was building. And we have proof that this was the intent, because when Jon Favreau and Kevin Feige shot Iron Man, their original post-credit scene with Nick Fury had him saying a different line.
As if gamma accidents, radioactive bug bites, and assorted mutants weren't enough.
Assorted mutants. They ended up cutting this line because they didn't want to run into some rights issues that were starting to bubble up, but you can tell creatively that was part of his vision. 2009's X-Men Origins Wolverine established that Wolverine was Weapon X, as in the 10th super soldier experiment that, true to the comics, began with Captain America Steve Rogers. Weapon 2001. Around this time, Marvel Studios was partnering with Paramount to produce the first Captain America film, and they considered in this movie cameos from James Howlett, Wolverine, and Eric Lensher, young Magneto, during Steve Rogers' exploits on the battlefield in World War II. Also, X-Men Origins Wolverine included a scene where Stryker's Team X goes to Nigeria to recover ore from a meteorite hinted to be vibranium because Stryker uses that ore to create adamantium. And again, this came out around when they were shooting the scene where Howard Stark was presenting Steve Rogers with a vibranium shield in the 1940s. And in the 2008 Hulk film, the origins of the Hulk and of Abomination were established to be a part of the same super soldier program history that Steve Rogers was a part of. And that, by extension, Wolverine was a part of it too. That's why on that tank that Thaddeus Ross finds is mentioned Dr. Erskine's alias and Vita Rays. It was all going to be part of the same government program. The pieces were all there in case Kevin Feige ever had the ability to connect them. The idea was that the MCU early years could share that continuity with the Fox X-Men, because why not? What would be the harm in keeping that door open, at least? That changed when Marvel Studios sold to Disney on December 31st, 2009, a deal that really started to go into effect in 2010, with all the productions that started happening after that. So any future collaborations with Fox, at least in the short term, were now off the table, because Fox and Disney were then rival studios. So Marvel Studios, as a Disney subsidiary, had to figure out a way to move forward and to build a Marvel universe without X-Men in it. And it was awkward and difficult. Part of the plan at the time was using versions of these characters without referencing their mutant backstory. So while building up to 2015's Avengers Age of Ultron, they introduced the Maximoff twins in the post-credit scene of 2014's Captain America Winter Soldier. This came after a dispute between Disney and Fox over the rights to these two characters, and it was settled in an agreement in which the Fox films could make their own version of Quicksilver that wouldn't reference the Avengers, and that Marvel could have their version of Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch that just didn't reference them as mutants or children of Magneto. And so, in the Age of Ultron film, director Joss Whedon got around this by using the code word of enhanced to describe these twins.
We have an enhanced in the field.
So basically, Joss Whedon created this sort of Elseworld reality that awkwardly danced around the fact that X-Men didn't exist in it. For the first time, the MCU started to feel a little incomplete. And that's why around this time, Marvel fans started to invent this backstory that Kevin Feige once described this as Earth 199999, but really that came from like an MCU reference book in 2008 that Kevin Feige had nothing to do with. But in their eyes, they just didn't want to call it 616 because it felt so different from the 616 comics. This video is sponsored by porkbun.com. Porkbun.com is a domain name registrar that makes getting your own domain name easy and affordable. Porkbun.com has the lowest price on hundreds of different domain extensions, things like .com, .xyz, .pro. So you can create a website to show off what you do with a name that's memorable, unique, and perfectly suited to you. Every domain name at Porkbun comes with tons of freebies like SSL certificates, WHOIS privacy, DNS, and URL forwarding, stuff that other domain registrars charge for. They've also got free trials for their link in bio tool that makes it easy to keep the links to all your platforms in one place, plus web and email hosting trials. Porkbun also has a ChatGPT-powered AI-generated search tool that's changing how people search for domain names. All these features and tools are backed by incredible support 365 days a year and more 5-star reviews on Trustpilot from real customers than anyone else. Porkbun is easy to use and navigate, so you can manage everything about your new domain name in one place. Plus, they're not trying to constantly upsell you like those other places do, so you're not being pressured to pay for products that you'll never use. Click the link in the description below and use code NEWROCKSTARS to get $1 off your next domain name from porkbun.com and build your online identity. So this fear of the mutant word would change years later when Disney bought Fox's film and TV properties outright. The WandaVision series in 2021 still didn't define Wanda as a mutant, just a twin born in 1989 in war-torn Sokovia, watching sitcom DVDs when a Stark warhead killed her parents and she used a hex to stave it off, followed by her and Pietro volunteering for Hydra and allowing experimentation with the Mind Stone that amplified their powers with cosmic radiation. But WandaVision did tip their hat to the X-Men with a cameo by Evan Peters as Pietro, Evan Peters being the Quicksilver from the Fox X-Men films, and Marvel finally used Mutant and Ms. Marvel for Kamala Khan, and Black Panther Wakanda Forever for Namor, and of course we've seen cameos from Patrick Stewart, Professor X, and Kelsey Grammer Beast, but those were in other universes. But let us imagine that the X-Men did exist in the MCU within its history, that in the years before Tony Stark declared, "I am Iron Man," the world in which these characters had been living in was actually marked by conflicts with mutant kind. Not what we saw in the Fox X-Men movies, but imagine something closer to a live-action X-Men 97, like in 1990s and early 2000s, with a government hunting mutants with Sentinels, various mutant registration efforts, conflicts between the X-Men and the Mutant Brotherhood, other villains like Magneto and Mr. Sinister and Apocalypse all making moves. What Nick Fury would have called assorted mutants when he came to ask Tony Stark for help. Perhaps in this reality, the Stark family actually manufactured Sentinels, and that civil conflict in Sokovia in 1999 outside the Maximoff's window was a mutant hunt or a fight over mutant rights. Perhaps in this reality, there was a real Civil War event over mutant and superhero registration, and Marvel heroes die. Either way, let's imagine this world is on fire. And so it is 2014. Wanda Maximoff, a young mutant, is exposed by Hydra scientists to the Mind Stone. And in the glow of that cosmic radiation, she sees her future self as the Scarlet Witch. But she doesn't know what she's looking at. From her point of view, she's Cinderella, and this is her fairy godmother. So hoping to end her suffering from Hydra's experiments and to finally bring an end to the civil strife that is tearing Earth apart, Wanda makes a wish, and she says, no more mutants. And the future Scarlet Witch hears her past self, and she warps all of reality in the MCU so that mutants, which are individuals with powers coming from a mutant X gene, are no longer mutants, and that everyone's memories have been warped to not remember anything related to mutant kind as part of their history. But Wanda and Pietro would still retain their powers because they were exposed to Infinity Stone radiation. That's how Wanda would still be on that destiny to become the Scarlet Witch. But in this warped reality, an X gene is no longer activated. It just remains dormant. So individuals like Charles Xavier, Scott Summers, Aurora Monroe, Hank McCoy, Jean Grey, Raven Darkholme, they're all still living their lives just as normal humans. No powers. James Howlett died in the late 19th century. Eric Lehnsherr sadly might not have survived the Holocaust. Essentially, the future Scarlet Witch had warped everyone's past, present, and future to eradicate or just really deactivate the X gene throughout all of history. And using the Mind Stone's powers covered it all up in a way even more powerful than Doctor Strange's Runes of Kafkal memory spell on Peter Parker, so that in this case, no one remembers mutants existed, no one says the word mutant, and even reality is warped in various glitches to erase mutant history from the historical record. And the history Ultron watched when he woke up was a lie. And instead of mutant-related conflicts, this reality-warped matrix that the Scarlet Witch put us all in is led by an Avengers team, fighting Hydra, fighting Ultron, fighting Thanos, the MCU that you and I have known. Now you may ask, would Thanos' snap have woken up our reality out of this spell? You know, with Wanda Maximoff dusting? No, because the person who cast this spell was her future Scarlet Witch self on the other side of the blip. So what happens to the mutants during the blip? Well, they aren't mutants anymore. They're just humans. Half of them dust like everyone else. And 5 years later, they come back. And even after Bruce Banner and Tony Stark both snap the 6 stones and release further blasts of cosmic radiation, life is pretty much back to normal in the MCU, but something specifically changes with the events of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Only after this movie do we start learning of mutants like Kamala Khan, Namor, Beast. She-Hulk included a reference to Wolverine existing somewhere in the MCU now, with a headline rating, Man with Metal Claws Fights in Bar Brawl. So really it seems what broke this no more mutant spell that we're talking about would be the Scarlet Witch's death or disappearance, whatever that was in Multiverse of Madness. That red shockwave that we saw as Wundagore Mountain crumbled could have been the reactivation of the mutant gene throughout history and throughout the universe. That could be why now suddenly there is a man with metal claws fighting in a bar brawl, making the news. They don't identify him as Wolverine. He is just a crazy drifter who doesn't know where he is and getting in fights. If he has metal claws, there now must have been a Weapon X operation in the MCU to give him that adamantium. So I believe the X-Men exist once more. We just haven't met them yet. And that the world just kind of suffers a general amnesia, post-trauma to whatever happened before 2014. Because it would be one of the many justified Mandela effects that the MCU is experiencing after things like the snap, after a celestial emerged from the Indian Ocean. No one knows what to believe right now. Okay, so to recap, the MCU we've been living in is a lie. Mutants used to exist alongside the Avengers, wars with Sentinels, and a past Civil War event with the X-Men happened, but in 2014, Wanda wished no more mutants, her future Scarlet Witch self-obliged, reality was warped, and now the mutant gene is reactivated, but everyone is confused and pretty slow to wake up. Now, yes, I get that Marvel will more likely do a multiverse incursion explanation, but that, I believe, just works best for the Fox X-Men lineup of actors. And on the other side of that, they're gonna have to merge with some other universe that they're gonna have to make up anyway, and I prefer that they just use a history in which the X-Men and the Infinity Saga history we know were part of the same history. And I guess you could say, oh, maybe Kang pruned all the mutants out of history and now Loki's letting them back in. Sure, but I just want to elevate the Scarlet Witch's importance to the MCU we've been living in because No More Mutants was such a pivotal moment coming out of House of M, and I want the Scarlet Witch to be the retroactive mother of the Infinity Saga. And hey, maybe that upcoming Vision Quest series could follow White Vision seeking Wanda out to wake up each of these X-Men and all of society to what really happened so that the true X-Men history could be restored. But I want to know your thoughts on this theory. I know there's a lot of holes you could poke in it. Go for it. Please like this video and subscribe to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye.